A deputy served a temporary order evicting me from my house, built on falsified timelines and an expired notary stamp. I stood in the doorway with our ledger and my pocket watch, a father who fixes hinges, not fights. They recast generosity as control and favoritism as abuse, weaponizing my daughter's training, while my wife's ally labeled my restraint intimidation. So I vowed to drag their paperwork into daylight, to make the record speak. When liars rewrite your life with letterhead, do you fight back? I am Frank Dalton, 62, retired supply sergeant turned home carpenter with steady hands. I keep a flip-open pocket watch in my jeans because clocks calm decisions. I run mornings by lists, coffee first, then a short walk, then a tidy garage check. I stack receipts by date and write clean labels because order slows panic. However, lately the house answers back with silence that buzzes like old wiring. My wife Marla fills rooms with purchases and plans, yet conversations skim the surface. I nod, sand edges on maple boards, and pretend the grain explains everything. And I tell myself retirement should feel lighter, even when my shoulders pull inward. The watch flips open at noon while I load nails into a belt pouch. My daughter Brooke texts a heart and a work update, which I file under good. I plan a small surprise dinner at her place with easy pasta and old stories. So I check the pantry, count jars, and jot a quick list for the market. The carpenter's square on my bench catches afternoon light and steadies my breath. I drive the old truck because rhythm sits better behind a manual shifter. On Maple Street, the day kinks sideways at the white picket curve. Brooke had said she would be out until late, cheerful and sure, and her driveway gate holds a shiny silver Lexus that should be in our garage. My chest tightens the way it used to before inspections on base. I park a half block down because instinct prefers distance over drama. The pocket watch clicks shut, and the sound feels louder than it should. So I cross the sidewalk, slow, pretending to admire a hedge while my pulse climbs. The living room blinds hang careless, leaving a thin wedge of afternoon glare. I angle my head and see Marla's handbag parked on Brooke's couch like a claim. However, the shape beside it is worse than the bag, then worse than the silence. Caleb Norton, my son-in-law, leans by the bookshelf with his lawyer's posture. His jaw works while he flips a manila folder with a green tab, and his finger trails a printed timeline that reads like a victory lap. Only the room's cadence. No words, just intent. So I shift closer, knees bent, shoes rolling on the balls like we practiced. Military training shows up when it wants, and today, it wants badly. Their voices ride the air in clipped bursts I could diagram by tone. I catch phrases about filing in summer and leveraging new statutes for an edge. However, the words that matter land soft and poisonous, exactly where certainty lives. She could claim half, maybe more, plus long-term support if framed right. He has no idea. He trusts completely. The paperwork is already copied elsewhere, and someone mentions rental valuations, bank statements, and an inventory that sounds like my life. My knuckles whiten on the window frame while the pocket watch presses my thigh. A folder with a green tab slides across the coffee table toward the couch. I raise the phone, swipe the recorder, and let the red light blink low. I keep my breathing shallow because sound travels when panic starts marching. Their conversation sharpens as if the room decides microphones deserve clarity. I hear my company name and the words asset map delivered like a checklist. However, the final straw is casual, like weather, like a note about leftovers. 2 years of performance gets praised as if loyalty were a role worth billing. The voices shift to schedule and to how fast September could change everything. And my daughter's name enters as a potential witness groomed by professional framing. My throat dries while the old truck key digs a half moon in my palm. I take a slow step back because boards creak and hedges whisper when you rush. So I keep the recorder running and retreat along the siding toward the yard corner. A twig snaps under my heel and hangs there like a firecracker that misfired. The living room goes still, then murmurs, then settles into forced normal again. However, the Lexus emblem on the grill catches sun and winks like a dare. I walk away slow, count 5 beats, then cross the street without turning around. The watch clicks open and closed in my fist because hands need tasks, and the time reads nothing important, yet the air insists the hour matters. I sit in the cab, seat springs complaining, while the phone warms my palm. So I replay 5 seconds to be sure the sound is more than wind. It is more than wind. It is planning dressed as paperwork. Breath short, fingers steady. Habit outruns fear. However, my voice thins when I practice what I might say later tonight. I imagine asking simple questions and getting simple answers with simple lies layered. The pocket watch sits on the dashboard, like a small brass witness with eyes. And I remember our wedding photo, and I remember drywall dust in our hair. We built life like a house, studs straight, corners square. So maybe I missed the hairline cracks because paint can hide a lot. The truck window shows me a man whose shoulders have learned to shrink. However, the man in the glass also spent decades solving problems under pressure. Into the memo. Facts corral panic. Cut noise. The Lexus is here. Brooke said she was out. My name appeared in strategy. And a green-tabbed folder exists. The window gave me line items and dates. I mark each point aloud, then timestamp them, then save a backup to the cloud. So the small errand becomes a map with arrows that all point home. My phone buzzes with a calendar ping I had forgotten to clear. It is the health check I booked for Marla and then rescheduled twice. However, the appointment sits under Brooke's address because convenience once mattered more than optics. The oversight glows, a sign I should have read earlier. And now small signs line up, each plain, each patient, each unblinking. Marla's sudden hunger for valuations had felt like curiosity about our future. So had the push for joint credentials, while she kept separate cards for points. The drive to the store turns into a slow roll past old proof. However, I am not hunting for a fight. I am verifying a hunch responsibly. The watch clicks again, and the sound organizes my next 5 moves cleanly. I will not touch their door. I will not leave marks. I will not give spectacle. And I will not call Brooke, not yet, because fairness needs more than heat. I start the engine and let the idle smooth my breathing to a lower pitch. So I pull away and circle the block twice to see if anyone follows. No one follows. The Lexus glints in the same spot like a stubborn coin. However, as I clear the corner, I notice a small reflection on the curb. A brass key ring lies under a hedge, scuffed and familiar, with an engraved N. I do not stop for it. I log the detail because chain reactions love bait. And I picture a night months ago when a spare key vanished quietly. My list grows meaner as the phone gathers the edges into one hard shape. So the errand to cook dinner turns into a test I did not design. I head home by side streets because crowds bump thoughts out of alignment. However, every light seems long, and every billboard seems to sell amnesia. The truck smells like sawdust and coffee, which is how I prefer truth delivered, and the neighborhood looks normal, which is how these things always look first. I back into the driveway because exits matter when you have to change course, so I sit with the engine off and count 10 heartbeats with eyes closed. The house waits, patient and quiet, like a field before weather breaks. However, the quiet no longer feels peaceful. It feels curated and expensive. The pocket watch rests in my palm, warm and oddly heavy for its size. And I open the door because staying in the cab suggests fear I will not permit. I line receipts in a row on the kitchen counter while the recorder saves, so the habits that bored my family become a little fortress built from paper. I boil water out of muscle memory and drain it because dinner no longer fits. However, I still wipe the stove ring because discipline is not a costume. The wedding photo on the hallway wall studies me with a younger man's mistake, and the folded flag case above the mantel catches afternoon and keeps its dignity intact. My voice returns to level as I rehearse neutrality for later encounters. So I draft a short message to myself about boundaries and documentation. The message reads like a checklist and not like a threat to anyone. However, checklists have teeth when combined with time, patience, and clean records. The pocket watch snaps shut again, and the click sounds like a small verdict. And I feel the house shrink around me by inches as the hour turns. Respect is withheld with manners, and exclusion wears perfume and polished shoes. So the Lexus at my daughter's gate becomes the kind of fact that rewires families. I pour the water from the saucepan and watch steam ghost the window over the sink. However, decisions taste better after a night of sleep and a morning of order. The recorder sits on the table, red light off now, weight undeniable anyway, and the space around me feels smaller, tighter, edged with a plan I have not spoken. Morning hits hot and tight, so I steady my breathing, open the ledger, and title a fresh page, Fair Check-ins. I set 3 actions: confirm schedules without accusation, request financial clarity, document outcomes, then eat standing and square my shoulders. At the market, I buy travel-safe ingredients, text Brooke for dinner windows, and log yesterday's driveway fact in a separate file. I draft a message to Marla about the health appointment and receipts for 2 recent purchases, then file it to send later. On the way home, I stop at the job supply store for gloves, bolts, a roll of tamper seals, and a small ledger because paper forces dates into order. Its first line records the silver car at Brooks, the matched occupants, the visible folder, the intent discussed. Back home, I stack groceries, note a jointly addressed bank envelope, listen for changes in the house, and mark a couch indentation and time. Coffee goes to the garage. Hands fold a tarp. The Lexus memory flashes, but my fingers stay steady. I outlined 3 talks. Brooke gentle and direct, Marla structured and short. I will not call Caleb. I pack Brooke's favorite pasta and a jar of sauce so the errand stands even if conversation stalls. At her building, a new keypad gleams. She once said she'd handle the upgrade. I buzz. The intercom voice says work runs late and suggests Sunday brunch. I leave the pasta, log the exchange and the deflection, and decide fairness means spacing attempts. At the bank, I request joint account summaries and beneficiary verification. 2 new debits misalign with recurring schedules. I mark the line items, ask for transaction codes, and photograph the pages for records because proof is quiet. At the hardware store, I buy blank keys and a magnetic box, pay cash, and head home. The neighborhood is cheerful. My driveway isn't. There's a fresh tire mark near the curb. I crouch, confirm rubber, follow the arc to the sidewalk's chalk flecks, photograph it, and log the observation. Inside, Marla messages a breathy apology. Headache, helped a friend, money feels tight, please loosen your grip, add her card for convenience. I catalog each sentence and reply with a neutral request for receipts, dates, and beneficiary details. While I wait, I check windows, latches, mail. The back door strike shows a small scuff that could be nothing, or a hurried exit, so I photograph and file it under maybe. Her follow-up promises receipts and mentions a spa promotion that pushed a charge, but ignores the beneficiary question and the 2 unscheduled debits. I mark that silence in red and note bank envelopes, stacking faster this quarter. I walk the block to keep focus while my brain assembles times, cars, and folders into one moral wound. Shame hardens into duty. Back home, I put a simple supper on low and line documents by category and date. I draft a calm sit-down with clear topics and boundaries, then hold it because timing matters. Brooke texts that work changed and she's wiped. Caleb will handle some home paperwork after client calls. I ask for a Sunday slot and offer errands. She replies with a thumbs up and a heart that now reads like wallpaper. I press both hands flat on the counter, then rehearse a 3-chair meeting with rules. Answers carry dates, amounts, and names. Every shared dollar needs 2 signatures. Talks have time limits because long talks become mazes. I drive to the Veterans Center lot for routine calm, sit without going in, and let painted lines reset my breathing. At dusk, I find the dining table reset, and one chair angled away like a flinch. I leave it askew so small truths can show. After supper, I load a bag with files and the new ledger, lock it to the desk loop, and keep moving past the wedding photo, because pictures freeze courage if you let them. Late, Marla proposes meeting at Brooks to simplify things. She frames it as efficient and kind, without asking what I want. I respond briefly and civilly. Different venue, my house, firm hour, quiet agenda. I send the message, record the timestamp, and accept that the first real clash is scheduled by location, Not volume, not insult, not spectacle. While the air in the room grows stricter, and a quiet decision hardens that will not slide. Exhaustion rides my shoulders before sunrise, but steadier is a choice, so I choose it. I open the ledger to yesterday's page and write 3 non-negotiables where I can't ignore them. Pause every shared dollar. Require 2 signatures. Log every request. I kill automatic transfers with calm clicks. One joint card requires an in-person step, so I schedule a 10 o'clock branch visit and note the confirmation. The pocket watch flips open beside the keyboard and keeps my pace honest. I call the utility office for split authorization. The clerk flags an address change request from late last night, so I place a hold and record the ticket number. I print 3 months of statements, stack them by category, and circle 2 merchant codes matching yesterday's anomalies. I refuse to dress up hurt as wisdom. I write numbers. I text Brooke a Sunday brunch invite at 11. Her gentle, "I'll try," is enough. I add conditions to the ledger and restate the rules. The truck starts on the first turn. Work replaces wondering. At the bank, I request verification of joint access points and temporary holds until we appear in person. The manager explains an old account Marla opened with broad privileges. I have them narrowed to current standards. We add alerts for large withdrawals and address changes. I sign and leave space for the second signature. It isn't victory, just first aid under fire. Outside, Marla texts asking if I changed settings again, suggesting money needs flexibility. I log it and drive to the accountant's office. The receptionist books me for tomorrow and asks for statements by email. I carry hard copies because paper rereads with the same face. Back home, I spread documents across the dining table. The map shows a lazy zigzag linking Marla and Caleb. 4 entries cluster around club lunches. I place the pocket watch above the cluster and let the pattern speak. I photograph time-stamped pages and file them twice. A calendar ping lands for tomorrow night's sit-down. I draft a tight agenda that fixes outcomes to actions. I walk the fence line, then rephotograph the faint tire arc with a ruler for scale and a shoe for context. I label street and orientation and put the ruler back in the truck door. Lunch is a sandwich, while emails queue. I send 5 facts, not motives. Inform the bank about the scuffed back latch and request camera pulls. Reaffirm the utility freeze on address changes. Ask my insurer to notify me if a vehicle gets added. I log names, initials, and times. Forms fill the room. Feelings wait outside on purpose. In the workshop, wood calms what paperwork agitates. Midpoint arrives without ceremony. I copy the recording to an encrypted drive and store the original offsite. I draft a summary document with precise timestamps, the green tabbed folder, the view angle through the blinds, and my position counted in paces. I press tamper seals on 2 desk drawers and photograph them, then leave a decoy folder labeled Budget Ideas. I message both households, ledger review here tomorrow, dual signatures now, questions answered with dates, amounts, beneficiaries only. I attach a 1-page summary of new bank alerts and mention no recording or photos. Brooke replies first, cautious but in. Caleb may have a late call. Marla calls my measures unnecessary and controlling, asks to postpone. I hold the time and attach the bank manager's notice. Afternoon wants louder moves. I install a keypad deadbolt, log the master code, set 3 chairs with equal sightlines, angle mine to avoid glare. I collect car titles, stack tax returns, and brew light coffee to outrun urgency. A contractor friend texts rumors about Caleb's slow payments. I log only the facts. At dusk, I walk the block to bleed restless energy. A black sedan idles near the corner with dark windows. It could be nothing or everything. I photograph the plate and email it to myself with time and location. Back home, I set a small tray of snacks because meetings work better fed. The doorbell rings. A courier hands me a thin legal envelope. I log the time and sender, photograph the envelope, then open it with my father's letter opener. The letter requests financial disclosures on a short clock, citing concerns about new access restrictions and hinting at an emergency motion. No accusations, just smooth courtesy. Bitterness hardens into something sharper. I add an escalation line in the ledger and file the document. Brooke sends a calendar hold for Sunday brunch, noting she wants to understand the rules. Marla again asks to move the meeting off-site. I refuse and cite the need for documents on hand, promising disclosures within lawful windows. At the bench, I flatten shadows with the lamp. The pocket watch reminds me timing wins when rooms run hot. I print conditions for tomorrow in large type, ID at arrival, device check-in, no recordings, and set a tray labeled After Meeting for signed copies. I confirm with the bank manager that alerts hit both phones and log his initials and time. I prep a neutral folder for Brooke. Sweeping the entry, I find a small screw that matches the back door strike plate. I reinstall it and note the fix, then tighten the motion light angle. I text Brooke that I appreciate her presence and that decisions will focus on money flows, not personal histories. Her quick reply says clarity will help her sleep. No message from Caleb. I lock the front door, test the new deadbolt twice, and clear the table except for 3 folders, 3 pens, and water glasses. I set the watch at the center and keep it closed for tomorrow's signal. The bank flags a declined club transaction on a card ending in 29, then blocks an address change attempt. I write the times and accept a quiet win without fanfare. Wins have costs. Cornered people find angles. I check curtains, lower the thermostat, arm the alarm, and sleeve the legal copy under incoming pressure. I rinse my mug and leave it upside down to dry. In the dark dining room, I study 3 chairs and picture hands on pens, not phones, words tied to numbers. A car slows, then moves on. I note the time and refuse to chase shadows that cannot testify. I climb the stairs counting steps like receipts, set the phone face down, and let the screen go black. Someone is preparing harder pushback while I sleep. Plans love pressure the way steel loves heat. I lie down with the pocket watch on the nightstand, closed, waiting for morning. Morning lands clear and spare, and the house answers with clean quiet. I set the table with 3 folders and 3 pens in a line. The chairs stay even, and the window light favors my seat by inches. However, I move 1 glass left because symmetry helps people breathe when corners tighten. I brew weak coffee and pour water alongside, then wipe the counter twice. The ledger waits open, and yesterday's ink holds its shape without bleeding. I accept that nothing here is normal, yet I keep rituals on purpose. And I accept that dignity requires order, even when order feels ceremonial today. I check locks and walk the hallway slow, letting my pulse find center. The back latch sits firm. The strike screw I replaced holds without protest. However, the door frame shows a faint rub where someone shifted weight impatiently yesterday. I log that mark with the time because small habits anchor larger storms. The first arrival text pings early, saying traffic might push beyond our start. And a second message follows from the other household, suggesting a later alternative again. I reply with the original hour, brief and civil, attached to the printed agenda. The house remains steady, and my breath stays slow as minutes stack evenly. However, my neck remembers heat and then lets it pass like a worn wave. I check my identification, place it under the top folder, then test the deadbolt. The kitchen clock ticks without drama, and the refrigerator hums like a distant generator. And the quiet tells me to trim expectations to fit what paper can carry. The doorbell rings at the exact minute, and I open with neutral posture. The first step into the room is small, and the eyes avoid mine. However, the seat choice places distance that announces caution louder than any sentence. I gesture to the chair that keeps sightlines level and the sun behind me. We sit, and I start with time, place, and the reason for these rules. And I say indirectly that answers will carry dates, amounts, and names only. The phone handling tray holds devices until we finish, and screens go dark compliantly. However, shoulders tighten across from me, and a foot taps once under the table. I slide the bank notice over, the one establishing dual signatures for shared accounts. The notice carries the manager's initials and timestamp and policy citation cleanly, and the first initials appear where they should, after a pause that resists gravity. The second document sets alerts for large withdrawals and address changes across platforms. However, resistance rises again, then settles when I point to the printed standards list. I keep my voice level and my sentences short because volume ruins precision quickly. We move to the card with the odd merchant codes and unusual timing clusters, and I describe the pattern without assigning motives because facts travel better without heat. A hand reaches for a water glass and misses the rim by half. However, the glass rights itself, and the chair eases back into position slowly. I ask about a spa promotion that pushed a charge beyond our usual plan. The response arrives with tidy phrases about stress and timing and a friendly discount. And I note the explanation, then underline the date because receipts will confirm or refuse it. We pause while the room resets, and I open the folder labeled Vehicles and Liens. However, that folder proves dull and clean, which relaxes shoulders around the table briefly. The legal envelope appears next, and I place it centered between our elbows. I report its contents plainly, noting requests for disclosures and a hinted emergency motion, and I add that disclosures will be met within lawful windows and no later. The temperature changes inside the room, although the thermostat reads the same number. However, I keep everything slow and even because rush creates accidents and regret. We sign an acknowledgement of the new dual signature policy for the 3 main accounts, and we agree to pause discretionary spending until the review finishes without theatrics. The phones return to hands, and faces harden into polite masks again. However, a quick screen glance betrays a message thread that races faster than tolerance. I end the session with a recap that lists actions, responsibilities, and next times. And I thank everyone for showing up, because showing up counts even during storms. The door closes and leaves the house quieter than before, clean and nearly empty. I collect the pens and stack the folders and breathe out through my nose. However, relief does not arrive. Only a workable calm takes up space in my chest. I wash the cups and set them upside down and let the counter air dry. The neighborhood begins its afternoon noises, engines and bikes, and 2 dogs complaining. And my mind inventories valuables only to keep the fear from naming shadows. I turn to the workshop bench and tighten a loose hinge on the tool cabinet. However, a vehicle door thunks outside, and footsteps pass the house without slowing. I step onto the front porch and watch leaves lift, then settle like tired flags. The phone buzzes with a new alert for a declined club transaction again, and a second alert follows for a blocked attempt to access the online portal. I record both times and return inside, then set water to boil on low. However, my appetite does not answer. I open the accountant's email and attach the statements and the bank notices carefully. The send bar creeps across, and the room feels narrower until the message leaves, and immediately another email lands with a meeting confirmation at 9 tomorrow. I print the confirmation and slip it into a clear sleeve labeled Appointments. However, the printer smears a corner, and I write the time by hand for clarity. Afternoon bends toward evening when the heavy knock finally hits the door. A uniformed deputy stands on the step with a packet thick enough to sag, and the packet carries a temporary order granting exclusive access to our home. The language describes financial control, intimidation, and an urgent need for protection. However, its dates miss reality, and its tone reads like a template with blanks. I accept the papers calmly and ask about immediate requirements for compliance. The deputy recites the basics and stays professional, then leaves without commentary, and the house inhales, then holds its breath, then waits for me to move. I spread the order on the dining table, then walk once around the room. However, no amount of walking changes letters that claim truth they do not own. I sit and read again, slower, and mark the time of service in the ledger. The order claims account restrictions began months before yesterday's bank alert timestamps, and it claims emotional intimidation consistent with isolation patterns not found in documented schedules. I write those contradictions in neat bullet points under a heading called Divergences. However, a line deep in the packet instructs me to leave the premises temporarily. I stand up straight, accept the hit, and collect necessary items with deliberate calm. I place identification, medication, and a clean shirt into a backpack with a charger, and I take the envelope copies, the ledger, and the page of divergences in a folder. I lock the desk drawers, arm the alarm, and step onto the porch without ceremony. However, the porch light flickers once, and something small inside me sits down soundlessly. I walk to the truck while dusk lays a thin bruise across the street. The engine turns, and I sit with hands on the wheel, letting silence weigh in. And then I drive to the city office corridor, because orders often require filings. However, the clerk's window closes 2 minutes after I arrive, and rules hold firm. I lean against cool tile and breathe through it, counting ceiling panels to 30. And memory brings back formation lines and long waits for clearance at dawn. The drill taught patience, and patience taught outcomes, and outcomes taught restraint under strain. However, restraint tastes dry tonight, and the fluorescent lights flatten everything into grayscale. I sit on a metal chair and open the packet again under the ledge light. The affidavit includes a paragraph about a dinner refused and a raised voice. However, the timestamp overlaps with tonight's meeting that produced signatures and calm acknowledgments. Another paragraph describes a credit line frozen without notice in late spring, and that conflicts with the bank's notice date and the manager's stamped initials. The more I read, the colder the words feel, and the steadier I become. However, steadier does not mean hopeful. It means precise and ready to move without tremor. My phone vibrates with a message from Brooke, asking whether I am okay. She says she heard something about orders and confusion and wants clarity tomorrow, and she adds that she will not pick sides until facts line up on paper. I answer with 3 sentences, each simple, each anchored to a document and time. However, I avoid spilling pain into her pocket, because pain burdens people unfairly. A second message drops from an unknown number pointing me to a storage unit. It implies that documents relevant to financial planning sit in locker 12 awaiting retrieval, and it suggests timing before morning, which reads like a trap dressed as a favor. I do not answer the message. I screenshot and save it for the accountant. However, the corridor remains a better classroom than any metal door with bad lighting. I leave the building and cross to the parking structure, where heat lingers stale, and my footsteps echo the way they used to echo in long barracks halls. I drive to a small diner and park without going inside for noise protection. The neon sign blinks on beat with my pulse until both settle to normal. However, hunger still fails to report, and water has to do the work alone. I call the bank's after-hours line and confirm that alerts remain active tonight. The voice reads protocol carefully, and I write initials, time, and confirmation number, and I request a branch appointment first thing to present the temporary order calmly. I rest both hands on the steering wheel and review the ledger entries again. However, fatigue edges in, and letters blur before sharpening as I blink hard. A police cruiser rolls by slowly, then continues without attention, and the lot exhales. And I decide to sleep at a modest motel near the accountant's office for efficiency. The clerk checks me in without questions and hands a small paper key folder. However, the room smells like detergent and a little smoke that will not leave. I set the folder on the dresser and place the ledger on the desk, and I lay out the packet, then arrange copies in the order needed for morning. I shower quick and cool, letting heat drain enough to soften my forearms. However, the mirror shows a face that holds itself like a doorway against weather. I lie down and close my eyes, counting breaths into a rhythm that soldiers know, and sleep arrives in pieces, then holds, then slips, then returns, keeping me functional. Dawn brings a gray sky and a parking lot littered by leaves and 2 receipts. However, the morning also brings a message from the accountant asking for early arrival. I answer yes, and load the folder into the backpack with the ledger securely. And I drive through quiet streets that pretend last night did not happen at all. The office smells like coffee and paper and the sharpness of morning thinking. The accountant reviews the order, then the statements, then the divergences page without commentary. However, her pen stops above a paragraph that lists filing times and clerk initials. She taps the time, then points to my bank alert timestamps logged last night, and the 2 lines refuse to live together on one honest timeline. She circles both and says the discrepancy could matter more than we think. However, she cautions that courts prefer patterns over surprises, so documentation must stack. We assemble a binder with tabs that move cleanly and a table of contents, and we include an index of calls with initials and reference numbers for verification. She drafts a letter requesting an expedited review of the temporary order's basis. However, we keep adjectives out and let the timestamps and policies carry the weight. I leave the office with the binder under my arm and a steadier pace, and I stop by the city office corridor again to file the request formally. The clerk accepts the packet and stamps a date that favors daylight over rumor. However, no promises come with the stamp, only a cue and a procedural shrug. I exit into the brightness and stand still while traffic breathes around the block. The weight in my chest lightens a fraction, not relief, just alignment with effort. And alignment helps me accept losses that arrive dressed as fairness with clean shoes. I text Brooke a 2-sentence update that references the filed request and binder. However, I do not invite commentary. I invite attendance and patience until review. The phone buzzes with an alert that a new device attempted portal access again. I screenshot it, send it to the accountant, and file it under ongoing patterns. And then I drive back toward my house because standing outside forever cannot protect it. I park on the street to avoid announcing myself to neighbors with a pattern. However, I do not approach the door. I observe the windows and the driveway quietly. A car I do not recognize sits across from the mailbox with a fresh parking tag, and a figure inside studies a tablet, then drives away when a call concludes. I note the time and plate and step back into the truck without lingering. However, the heavy blow still sits in my pocket like a hot coin. The order stands until someone braver than paper asks harder questions in daylight. I accept that reality and protect essentials I can still protect without theater. And I set arrangements for mail holds, and I forward bills to the P.O. box. I call a friend to store 2 sentimental items that matter more than couches. However, I keep the call brief and name only objects, not circumstances or fears. Afternoon slides into an uncertain warmth that fails to soften the shape of today. And yet my voice steadies when I call to schedule a legal consultation tomorrow. The assistant takes details, and I provide only what the forms require precisely. However, the final question asks for preferred contact method, and I choose email for records. I end calls and return to the diner lot where light turns kind around edges. And I open the binder to the circled timestamps and the mislabeled line in the affidavit. The circled pair sits defiant, refusing to coexist without explanation or repair. However, a faint lever appears when I notice a smudge on the notarization stamp. The notary's commission expiration predates the filing date by weeks, which complicates validity. And the stamp impression overlaps a margin note that mentions a breakfast reservation elsewhere. I take a photo of that page with the motel invoice under it for scale. However, I do not call anyone. I write a single sentence under possibility. The sentence reads like a door cracked open. Not hope yet, just air. I wake before the alarm and stand taller than yesterday without trying. My chest opens as if a strap snapped free behind my ribs. I shower cool and shave slow, then square my shoulders in the mirror. However, the face looking back belongs to a man who finished hesitating last night. I pack the binder, the ledger, and the sleeve labeled divergences into the bag. The door locks behind me with a clean click that lands like a drumbeat, and the morning air feels brisk even under summer heat, crouching over the street. I drive to the courthouse early and park where I can watch both exits. The city office corridor smells like paper again, yet the air tastes sharper. I check in with the clerk and sign where the blue tab points. However, my hands remain steady, and my breath stays deep, slow, and consistent. The waiting bench gives me a backstop while I reorder tabs for fast retrieval, and I place the notarization page beside the timestamp page because they will dance together. The hearing notice calls the room to order, with the usual bureaucratic throat clear. I step forward when summoned and stand square, feet shoulder width, gaze level and direct. However, I keep sentences short because nerves sabotage people who love extra flourishes. I present the binder, then the index, then the 2 pages circled in pencil. The first page shows portal alerts with device IDs and minute-level precision across nights, and the second page shows the affidavit clock arguing with those alerts shamelessly and loudly. I slide the notary page and point to the commission date that expired early. However, I do not accuse anyone. I let the stamp explain itself without help. My lawyer notes that temporary orders rely on credible timelines and valid attestations strictly. She adds that address change attempts failed due to holds initiated the night before service, and she references the bank manager's initials and the call log entries already on record. The room listens harder when timelines collide, and paperwork contradicts itself without mercy. However, I keep my posture open and my jaw easy, because composure invites credibility. The clerk collects the packet and whispers to the judge while flipping 2 tabs, and the judge reviews quietly, then asks for any additional foundation beyond the printed discrepancies. My lawyer states that a time-stamped summary of recorded phrases is available for review. She clarifies that the summary captures planning language about asset maps and filing windows. However, she states we withheld audio today to avoid spectacle and preserve fairness carefully. The judge nods once and turns to the temporary order with a thoughtful expression. And the order's spine seems to loosen as air re-enters the room between sentences. Ruling. Order vacated. However, the court preserves access safeguards and instructs both parties to maintain current holds. My chest loosens, and the weight shifts off my sternum like a heavy vest, and the hallway looks wider as I sign for certified copies with a steady pen. Outside, the heat presses down, yet my steps feel even and assured anyway. I call the bank from the courthouse steps and confirm alerts remain active indefinitely. However, I do not gloat. I log confirmation numbers and thank the representative by name. I drive straight home and park at the curb because arrival deserves plain geometry today. The house stands quiet, blinds half tilted, afternoon light sliding across the dining table, and the 3 chairs still hold yesterday's angles like a snapshot of negotiated distance. I set the certified copy at the table's center and open the ledger calmly. However, I do not sit yet. I keep moving because stillness invites pity and mess. I message both households that the order was vacated and the safeguards remain unchanged. I state the hour for a final review and outline boundary terms in 3 bullets, and I include copies of the court's minute order and the index page for reference. I eat an apple standing while checking the driveway camera, then clear my browser history. However, food finally tastes like food, and water feels like relief instead of duty. Tires crunch near the curb, then doors thump, then footsteps cross the front walk. And I open the door before the bell, because theatrics belong to people without proof. We gather in the dining room again, but the light feels stricter this time. However, my shoulders remain squared, and my breath settles low where strength likes living. I begin with the court's action and the requirement to maintain all current restrictions, and I place the certified copy where the sunlight turns the seal gently translucent. I slide the bank notices next, and the call log index beside the ledger. However, I keep my voice trimmed to verbs and dates because nouns already fill the table. I describe attempted portal access times and the holds that blocked changes across accounts, and I outline the debit anomalies and the merchant clusters arranged by weeks and totals. I keep names to a minimum and target behaviors because people pivot when blamed loudly. However, I state that shared funds now move only with 2 signatures and receipts. I deliver the rule slowly, so comprehension cannot claim I rushed past consequences. And I state a short line about transparency with beneficiaries on every account immediately. My chest stays open, and my stance feels rooted like posts set in gravel. However, throats clear across from me, and eyes search corners for an exit that isn't there. I slide the notarization page forward and rest my finger on the commission date, and I explain the mismatch quietly, then add the portal alert timestamps for context. The room exhales as if it realized it had been holding its breath too long. However, one face hardens and shifts to indignation that reads more rehearsed than genuine. I do not react. I set the boundary again and point to the safeguard language. And then I deliver it once, clean and final. Dignity in this house is not negotiable. The sentence lands and sits, heavy and simple, like a placed stone on dirt. However, I follow it with terms that separate choices from consequences without moral theater. The terms require returning keys, revoking unauthorized user access, and consolidating records by Friday. And the terms define immediate pauses on discretionary spending until monthly reviews stabilize patterns. I add an option for supervised review of documents with the accountant tomorrow morning. However, I clarify that unsupervised transfers or edits will trigger automatic holds without discussion. I keep the pace even, and the room stops chasing side roads and narrow alleys, and I feel anger burn clean, not hot, as the facts keep the heat useful. A chair scrapes, and a hand gestures broadly before settling flat on the table. However, the hand trembles when faced with signatures and seals that will not blink. I slide a separate folder toward Brooke that holds neutral summaries and next steps, and I tell her, in simple reported words, that attendance and clarity helped today. Her shoulders ease half an inch, which counts as proof that fairness actually breathes. However, another face tightens again, then tries a softer angle that asks for delay. I refuse gently, and point to the calendar where deadlines already mark the page. And I state that delay without cause equals refusal, and triggers the safeguards automatically. The final signatures arrive slower than molasses, but arrive anyway under watchful light. However, one signature pushes through the paper, enough to leave a denting ridge. I mark receipt of keys and note the fob serial number while hands withdraw quickly. And I slide the device tray forward and request logouts from bank apps here and now. The phones land reluctantly, then click through screens like actors forgetting their lines mid-scene. However, the confirmations stack, and screenshots join the binder with timestamps that hold their shape. I open the legal envelope copy and place it beside the minute order calmly, and I state that disclosures will be met in full within the lawful window exactly. I add that any contact about orders must route through counsel, and not through whispers. However, I keep my tone level, because I am not auditioning for righteous thunder. The room quiets as the signatures finalize and the keys settle in a bowl, and the space resets around us, level again, as if the floor found its studs. I collect the papers, stack them straight, and close the binder with a soft click. However, I do not chase apologies or explanations because outcomes outrank speeches by miles. I walk to the door and stand aside, granting exit without dramatics or glares, and footsteps move down the hall, then across the porch, then into the afternoon heat. The house listens afterward and then releases a breath I did not know it held. However, justice rarely feels triumphant. It feels clean, measured, and slightly cold around the edges. I put the keys in a small dish and print the confirmation emails for records, and I text the accountant a concise update and request a morning slot for inventories. I refill a glass and drink until the tightness under my collarbone loosens. However, the silence carries a ripple, and I follow it to the doorway cautiously. A plain envelope sits under the mat with a latent print of a heel on top, and inside, a single photocopy shows a transfer request drafted but never submitted anywhere. The names match a merchant cluster and a date that nearly matched last week. However, the request includes a handwritten note about postponing until after tonight's order. I log it without dramatics and slide it into the binder under ongoing patterns. And I stand in the doorway, breathing easily while the sun lifts off the street. The core conflict stands resolved enough for sleep, yet a small aftermatter trembles nearby. However, I am ready for its shape, whatever it chooses, because the room is level now. The house wakes soft and slow, and my steps match its pace. I open windows and let a mild breeze fold into the curtains. The dining table sits bare except for the binder and a pen. However, the room feels honest again, as if studs found their plumb line. I brew light coffee and slice an apple, then wash the knife. I check the ledger, add today's date, and draw a small square. The square marks maintenance, not crisis, and my chest releases an inch, and the air tastes clean, like a shop after sawdust settles overnight. I text the accountant a short thanks and confirm monthly reviews going forward. The reply arrives brisk and warm, confirming calendar holds for the quarter. I set reminders for statements, signatures, and receipts with clear weekly cadence. However, I keep alerts modest, because noise pretends to be vigilance when fear lingers. I walk the yard and tighten a gate hinge that squeaked during storm weeks. The screwdriver fits perfectly, and the turn lands with a decisive little bite. I log the fix on the ledger's maintenance line and move the pen. And I pull 2 weeds by the mailbox because small order multiplies inside hearts. A message from Brooke appears, asking about dinner here after work tonight. She writes that she wants calm, clarity, and a smaller circle for now. However, she adds that boundaries help her breathe, and she hopes mine stay steady. I answer with a simple yes and suggest burgers on the backyard grill. The afternoon passes in measured chores that feel like muscles remembering familiar forms. I set aside documents for the attorney and pack copies for later calls, and I scan the last page of the vacated order for the archive. I drive to the post office and file mail forwarding revisions in person. The clerk stamps 3 forms, and the rhythm taps a steadier drum inside. However, the counter's plexiglass throws my reflection back in professional slices. I look ordinary again, which is exactly what survival loves to wear. I buy 2 books of stamps and a small padded envelope for returns, and I mail a check to the utility after triple-checking the account code. On the way home, I stop for ground beef, onions, and a ripe tomato. The cashier bags everything carefully, and I thank her with a nod. However, ordinary courtesies land deeper when turbulence has finally cleared the runway. The backyard looks inviting, and the grill stands ready like an old friend. I clean the grate and set a fresh tray beside the patio chair, and I place 3 plates on the outdoor table, though only 2 are needed. A light breeze carries the scent of cut grass from the neighbor's yard. However, my hands move with unhurried precision, and the matches stay in the box. I hear a car door, then the gate latch, then shoes on the stone path. Brooke steps into the yard, eyes careful, shoulders slightly guarded, but higher, and she hugs me briefly, then steps back and asks about the grill. We speak indirectly about long weeks and new rules and calmer rooms. However, fewer words work better tonight, and we let actions do heavy lifting. I hand her the spatula and show the heat zone map with gestures. She nods, flips once, and smiles with half her old ease returning. And I plate the first burger, then the second, then set the condiments. We eat under easy light while sparrows argue in the hedge beyond. However, we keep conversation practical, letting repairs outrank autopsies by a mile. She reports that she changed her portal passwords and cleaned her document folders. She says weekly check-ins would help, Sundays at 11, simple and brisk, and she asks whether I will hold her honest if drift sneaks in. I tell her I will, using soft words and steady eye contact only. However, I add that her life is hers, and my job is truth. We clear plates, and she insists on washing while I dry in rhythm. The kitchen fills with ordinary sounds that carry more weight than victory speeches, and I feel a lightness settle where exhaustion used to hammer at bones. We move to the front porch with lemonade and sit without reaching for phones. The street holds twilight in a soft hollow, and traffic keeps its distance. However, one porch light across the way blinks, then steadies into its evening posture. Brooke studies the quiet, then thanks me for boundaries instead of punishments. She says fairness felt like oxygen, even when consequences stung her pride. And she adds that grief still lives here, but it stopped driving the car. I nod and sip, and the porch boards answer with a small creak. The day feels finished, yet not exhausted, just placed in the right drawer. However, a low memory stirs of barracks evenings when order followed chaos. I let it pass without ceremony, because today belongs to gentler practice. A delivery van slows, then passes, and leaves the block to crickets, and the light shifts from gold to blue, and the hedge grows its shadows. My phone buzzes with a short message from Marla requesting a conversation later. She writes that she wants to apologize and explain, preferably in public somewhere. However, she adds 3 conditions that sound like stage directions rather than contrition. I read the message twice and let my jaw unclench before answering. I reply that written apologies arrive clearer and travel better through reviews, and I add that future contact runs through counsel until patterns improve dramatically. I wish her health without sarcasm and set the phone face down again. However, I do not let the porch lose its temperature to old storms. Brooke asks if forgiveness is possible with time and evidence and steadiness. She wonders aloud what shape grace should take when harm was deliberate. And she says she trusts whatever guardrails keep us human without going blind. I answer that grace is a tool, not a leash, and requires distances. However, I add that people can change if truth holds firm and stays visible. We talk brief logistics about holidays and simple meals and short visits on neutral ground. She suggests the church hall as a trial venue if family gathers again, and she prefers a sign-in table for devices to keep focus intact. I agree with that plan and praise her eye for details that prevent drift. However, we also define exits, time limits, and a default to reschedule if heat rises. Crickets close ranks around dusk, and the block finds its nighttime breathing pattern. Brooke stands, stretches, and says she will text after she finishes notes tonight, and she thanks me for not making her choose sides with loaded scripts. We walk to the gate together, and the latch lifts with a clean click. However, she pauses and places her hand on my forearm for a second. The moment is small, human, and enough for now without extra sparkles, and she leaves with a calm wave that lands like a promise kept gently. I return to the kitchen and rinse the glasses and wipe the counter. The ledger waits on the table where morning left it, square and patient. However, the pen feels lighter in my hand, and the lines look less stern. I add one line about the grill dinner and the porch decisions made. I note the weekly check-ins and the proposed church hall plan for reunions, and I mark the next accountant session with a star because cadence outlives storms. I set 2 envelopes for tomorrow's mail, one return and one confirmation. The stamps sit aligned, and the addresses center neatly over the window panels. However, no part of this feels punitive. It feels like breath with structure attached. I tidy the living room and fold a blanket, then straighten a frame. The wedding photo stays where history belongs, with context, not with power anymore. And the couch cushion holds its shape because no one pressed a false story there. I step into the hallway and switch off lights, keeping the entry lamp on low. The house doesn't feel lonely. It feels selective about who gets a key. However, I know loneliness will visit some nights and ask for the couch. I will meet it with lists, walks, calls, and 2 eggs on a plate. And I will keep my calendar loyal to who shows up and signs cleanly. I sit at the edge of the bed and breathe until shoulders soften completely. The night air drifts through the open window and settles into a steady hush. However, a faint ache lingers where shock once nested, which seems like an upgrade. I place the bag under the desk and lock the loop without second guessing. I leave the binder on the shelf where it can rest without beckoning, and I check the alarm, then turn the key in the deadbolt because rituals matter. Tomorrow will bring work calls, 2 errands, and a short note to counsel. However, tomorrow will also bring a walk, a sandwich, and a clean desk. I lie back and let the quiet cover me without argument or bargaining. Sleep comes like a friend, not a guard, and holds the room in place. And the lesson arrives with it, plain as bread and as strong as oak. Gratitude belongs to truth, not flattery, and human value lives beyond convenience. However, forgiveness needs boundaries that hold, because love without guardrails breaks people quietly.